Parasites like you shouldn't be allowed to breathe air in this country." Those words would later come back to cost Officer Frank Miller his reputation, his badge, and his pension. Those were the words that would play on a loop in his mind long after the sound of a gavel became the stuff of his nightmares. If you've ever wondered if karma is real, and if it ever hits with the force of a freight train, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because you're about to witness a masterclass in consequences. Dr. Alana James felt the crisp morning air on her face as she approached the historic Charleston City Hall. The sun glinted off the polished leather of her handbag, which contained the preliminary findings of a 6-month undercover investigation into municipal corruption. She was dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, casual and understated. To any observer, she was just another citizen, another civil servant, another face in the crowd. That was Officer Miller's first mistake. "Whoa, whoa! Hold on there! Where do you think you're going?" His voice was a low growl, laced with the kind of contempt that had been festering for 20 years. Miller blocked the grand entrance, his bulky frame a wall of cheap authority. He looked down at Dr. James, his eyes raking over her expensive suit, her confident posture, and seeing nothing but a threat. "Good morning. I have an appointment on the 4th floor," Alana said, her voice calm and even. She held out her state-level identification. "Dr. Alana James, Office of the Inspector General." Miller barely glanced at the ID. He saw the dark skin, the confident eyes, and his mind filled in the rest of the story for him. "Inspector General?" "Right. And I'm the mayor of Fantasyland. This is a restricted entrance for authorized personnel. The public entrance is around the back with the rest of the circus." "Officer, this is a valid state credential. I am authorized—" Before she could finish, his hand shot out and slapped the ID from her grasp. It skittered across the marble floor. His other hand shoved her hard against the cold stone pillar of the entrance. The shove was so violent, her handbag flew from her hand, popping open upon impact. Confidential files, charts, and painstakingly gathered evidence scattered across the steps like fallen leaves. He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour with the smell of stale coffee. "Parasites like you shouldn't even be allowed to breathe air in this country." He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with a practiced, brutal efficiency. "You think you can just waltz in here with your fake ID and your fancy words? Not today." Metal cuffs bit into her wrists, cold and unforgiving. Other guards, drawn by the commotion, began to gather. A few snickered. One pulled out his phone, a smirk playing on his lips as he started recording. Alana's heart pounded, a drum beat of controlled fury. Her cheeks stung where it had scraped against the pillar, but her eyes were fixed on the gilded letters above the door. Charleston City Hall, Office of the Mayor. She was being assaulted, humiliated, and illegally detained less than 50 feet from the office of the very man her investigation was about to expose. The irony was a bitter pill. Within the hour, Alana was sitting not in an office, but in a sterile, windowless conference room used for disciplinary hearings. A temporary nameplate on the table read, "Defendant." Across from her, Officer Frank Miller was straightening his tie, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He was performing for an audience of 2, City Manager Richard Davies and Head of Security Bob Petrovich. They were the system, and the system always protected its own. "Mr. Davies, sir," Miller began, his voice a practiced symphony of feigned professionalism. "As I was securing the main entrance this morning, I was confronted by this individual." He gestured dismissively toward Alana, whose wrists were still red from the cuffs. A deep purple bruise was beginning to bloom on her cheek. She was attempting to bypass security using what was clearly a fraudulent identification card. When I challenged her, she became belligerent and verbally abusive. Davies, a soft, doughy man whose primary skill was avoiding conflict, nodded along. Verbally abusive, you say? Yes, sir. Extremely hostile, Miller lied, warming to his narrative. She started screaming about conspiracies, calling me a pig, claiming she was some kind of high-level inspector. It's a classic tactic we see from professional agitators. They cause a scene to film it, then they sue the city. They're parasites looking for a payday. His partner, a younger guard named Henderson, chimed in from the corner. I saw the whole thing, sir. She was completely unhinged. Frank handled it by the book. He showed incredible restraint. The lie was so bald, so effortless, it was clear this was a well-rehearsed script. She was carrying a handbag full of documents, Miller continued, his eyes gleaming. Looked like copies of city planning permits, financial records. We suspect she may be involved in some kind of fraud or identity theft ring, trying to get access to the city's archives. The accusation was so perversely twisted, so perfectly backward, that Alana almost laughed. He was accusing her of the very crimes she was here to investigate. In my professional opinion, Miller said, puffing out his chest, this is a textbook case of an entitled activist trying to provoke law enforcement. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was looking for a confrontation, and when she got one, she immediately started crying foul. He turned to look directly at Alana, his lips curled into a sneer. These people think the rules don't apply to them. Well, today she learned that actions have consequences. He had no idea how right he was. City Manager Davies sighed, looking at Alana with weary annoyance. Ma'am, you've heard the testimony of these officers. Do you have anything to say for yourself before we proceed with charges of trespassing, disorderly conduct, and assaulting an officer? Alana James rose slowly from her chair. The metallic scrape of the chair legs on the tile floor was the only sound in the room. The men in the room expected tears, excuses, perhaps a rambling, incoherent defense. They were about to be very, very wrong. Thank you, Mr. Davies, she began. Her voice was not the hysterical shriek Miller had described. It was calm, measured, and resonated with an authority that seemed to suck the air out of the room. I would like to address several material falsehoods in Officer Miller's statement. Miller shifted on his feet. This wasn't the tone of a cornered parasite. First, Alana said, her eyes locking on to Miller, Officer Miller claims I was attempting to bypass security. In fact, I was presenting a valid State of South Carolina Office of the Inspector General credential, which, according to State Administrative Code 7, Section 4, grants me unrestricted access to any municipal or state government facility in the performance of my official duties. Davies blinked. Petrovich, the head of security, frowned. This was not the language of a common trespasser. Second, Officer Miller testified that I became verbally abusive. I would like to formally request that this hearing obtain and review all unedited audio and video recordings from the main entrance between 8:45 a.m. and 9:05 a.m. this morning. She turned her gaze to the head of security. Mr. Petrovich, I'm sure you're aware that City Hall's security camera system, model H47, automatically backs up all footage to a secure off-site cloud server, regardless of any malfunctions that might occur with the local recording units. The color began to drain from Miller's face. He had, in fact, accidentally, erased the footage from his own body cam. He hadn't counted on the main system backups. Furthermore, Alana continued, her voice as sharp as surgical steel, Officer Miller alleges that the documents in my handbag are evidence of a fraud scheme. I can assure you they are indeed evidence of fraud. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Specifically, they are Exhibits A through G in a sealed state investigation into bid rigging and kickbacks within the Charleston City Planning Commission. City Manager Davies's jaw went slack. He looked like a fish that had just been pulled from the water. As for the final charge, assaulting an officer, the video evidence will clearly show that Officer Miller initiated unprovoked physical contact, constituting felony assault and battery against a state official. She looked at the younger guard, Henderson. It will also show that you, Officer Henderson, not only failed to intervene but actively obstructed justice by providing a knowingly false statement to your superiors, which is a criminal offense. Henderson looked like he was about to be sick. Mr. Davies, Petrovich, the security chief, finally spoke, his voice strained. Who exactly are you? Alana allowed herself a small, cold smile. That is the question of the hour, isn't it? She reached into her jacket pocket, moving with deliberate slowness. Officer Miller confiscated my identification. However, he was not thorough enough to check my coat. She placed a small, leather-bound credential wallet on the table and flipped it open. The gold seal of the state of South Carolina gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Below it, in stark official text, were the words, Dr. Alana James, Inspector General State of South Carolina. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Officer Miller's ragged breathing. I believe, Alana said, her voice now dripping with ice, that we need to recess this hearing. Not for 15 minutes, but indefinitely. She looked at Davies, who was now a pale, sweating mess. Because this is no longer a disciplinary hearing. It is now an active crime scene, and you, Mr. Davies, are now a material witness in a federal investigation. The game had just changed, and Officer Miller was beginning to realize he had never even understood the rules. If you think the karma train is about to pull into the station, hit that like button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. During the so-called recess, the conference room transformed. It was no longer a place for a minor personnel issue. It was the nerve center of a bombshell investigation. Alana's first call was to her deputy, Mark, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his efficiency. Mark, it's me. Execute protocol Crimson Tide. Now. Alana, are you okay? We were about to send in the state troopers. I'm fine, she replied, her voice steady. But the timeline has moved up. I want warrants served on the mayor's office, the planning commission, and the city manager's office. I want every computer, every file, every hard drive seized. And Mark, she added, send a uniformed state trooper to conference room 3B at City Hall. I have a suspect I need detained. Her second call was to the governor's chief of staff. Jessica, it's Alana. The Charleston operation is live. Things got complicated. The mayor and the city manager are compromised. We have evidence of widespread corruption, and now we also have felony assault on a state officer. The line was quiet for a moment. Alana, what do you need? I need you to clear the path. The pushback from the city is going to be immense. I need the full backing of the governor's office, publicly and unequivocally. And I need a press conference scheduled for 3 p.m. this afternoon. The people of this city deserve to know who they've been trusting. Consider it done, Jessica said. Unleash hell, Alana. Back in the conference room, the atmosphere was thick with dread. City Manager Davies was wringing his hands, his face the color of old parchment. Head of Security Petrovich was staring at his shoes, avoiding eye contact with anyone. And Officer Frank Miller. He was a statue carved from fear. He sat ramrod straight, his mind struggling to process the cataclysmic shift in his reality. The powerless woman he had manhandled and insulted just an hour ago was now the single most powerful person in the building, and quite possibly, the state. A sharp knock came at the door. A tall, imposing state trooper in a crisp gray uniform entered the room. He surveyed the scene, his eyes landing on Alana. Inspector General James? I was told you required my assistance. I do, trooper, Alana said calmly. She gestured toward a stunned Frank Miller. "Please place this man under arrest. He is being charged with felony assault, battery, perjury, and obstruction of justice." The trooper didn't hesitate. He walked over to Miller, who seemed to shrink in his chair. "Sir, please stand up and place your hands behind your back." The sound of the trooper's handcuffs clicking shut was deafeningly loud. It was a sound Miller had inflicted on hundreds of others, a sound of power and control. Now it was the sound of his world ending. As the trooper led him away, Miller looked back at Alana, his eyes pleading. I didn't know," he stammered. Alana met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "That's the point, Mr. Miller. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw a black woman and you saw a target. You saw someone you thought had no power, and you decided to make an example of her. But you made a mistake. You weren't assaulting a random citizen. You were assaulting the very system of checks and balances designed to hold people like you accountable." After Miller was removed, Alana turned her attention to Davies and Petrovich. She walked over to the table and picked up her bag, now closed and resting on the chair. She placed it on the table and snapped it open. "Now," she said, her voice dropping to a businesslike tone, "let's talk about the bid for the new waterfront development project." She pulled out a file thick with documents. "A project awarded to a construction company, Palmetto Builders, which is a shell corporation owned by your brother-in-law, Mr. Davies, a company that has received over $50 million in no-bid city contracts over the past 3 years." Davies began to tremble. She then looked at Petrovich. "And let's talk about your security budget. Specifically, the $200,000 contract for new surveillance cameras, the very same H-47 model I mentioned earlier, which were purchased from a company owned by your cousin, at a 300% markup over market value." Petrovich looked like he was going to faint. "You see," Alana said, leaning against the table, "this morning wasn't part of my plan. My plan was to finish my investigation quietly over the next 2 weeks. But your officer, in his infinite arrogance, just handed me a beautiful gift. He created a public incident that gives me the legal and political cover to blow this entire corrupt enterprise wide open. Right here, right now." She pulled out her phone and swiped to a video file. It was the crystal-clear, high-definition footage from the City Hall security camera. She hit play. The entire room watched in horrified silence as the assault played out. The shove, the scattered papers, the cuffs. But this time, the audio was perfectly clear. "Parasites like you shouldn't be allowed to breathe air in this country." Miller's hateful words filled the room. Davies flinched as if he'd been struck. Alana paused the video. "This, gentlemen, is what institutional rot looks like. It starts with men like Miller, who abuse their power on the street level, and it's protected by men like you, who abuse your power in the executive suites. It's all the same disease." She straightened up, all business once more. "A team from my office is on their way. They will be conducting formal interviews with both of you. I suggest you find attorneys. Good ones." She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. She looked back at the 2 shattered men. "Oh, and Mr. Davies," she said, "consider this my official notice. The state is taking temporary receivership of the Charleston city government, effective immediately. You're relieved of your duties." She walked out of the room without another word, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 careers and the start of a city's painful, necessary rebirth. The full weight of justice was about to come down, and it was going to be glorious. The 3 p.m. press conference was a media firestorm. In front of a wall of cameras, flanked by the state attorney general and the governor's chief of staff, Inspector General Alana James stood at the podium. The bruise on her cheek was visible, a stark, silent testament to the morning's events. She didn't hide it. She wore it like a badge of honor. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice ringing with authority. "This morning I came to Charleston City Hall to do my job. My job, as the State Inspector General, is to serve as a watchdog for the people of this great state, to root out corruption, and to ensure that public officials are held to the highest ethical standards." She detailed, in calm, unflinching terms, the assault she had endured at the hands of Officer Miller. She then played the security footage on a large screen for all the world to see. Gasps rippled through the press corps. "What happened to me this morning was not the act of one rogue officer," she declared. "It was the symptom of a deep and pervasive culture of corruption and impunity that has taken root in this city's government. A culture that allowed an officer with a history of misconduct to feel emboldened enough to assault a citizen in broad daylight on the steps of City Hall." She then dropped the bombshell. "Effective immediately, my office, in conjunction with the State Attorney General, has launched a full-scale investigation into the Charleston municipal government. Warrants have been served, evidence has been seized, and I can tell you today that we have uncovered a massive scheme involving bid rigging, embezzlement, and bribery that goes all the way to the top." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Alana held up a hand for silence. "This will be a long and difficult process," she continued, "but I make this promise to the good people of Charleston. We will be relentless. We will follow every lead. We will turn over every stone. And anyone, from a security guard to the highest-ranking official who has violated the public trust, will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law." She looked directly into the lead camera, her eyes blazing with conviction. "To those who feel they have no voice, to those who have been bullied, mistreated, or ignored by the people in power, I say this: I see you. I hear you. And today, the fight for justice has begun." The fallout was swift and spectacular. Frank Miller was charged and, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 10 years in state prison, stripped of his pension, and ordered to pay restitution. In his sentencing hearing, the judge called him a disgrace to the uniform and a cancer on the community. Officer Henderson, his partner, was fired and pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. He received probation in exchange for his full testimony against the corrupt officials. City Manager Richard Davies and Head of Security Bob Patrovich were both indicted on federal corruption charges. Their trials exposed a network of graft that had siphoned millions of dollars in taxpayer money. Both were convicted and are now serving lengthy federal sentences. The mayor, implicated in the scandal, resigned in disgrace just hours before impeachment proceedings were set to begin. But Alana's work didn't stop there. The investigation she spearheaded led to a complete overhaul of the Charleston city government. New ethics laws were passed. A civilian oversight board with real power was created to review police and security conduct. The city's contracting processes were made transparent and accountable. The 32 complaints that had been filed against Frank Miller over his career, all previously dismissed as unsubstantiated, were reopened. The city settled with every single one of his victims, paying out millions of dollars from a fund seized from the convicted officials' illegal assets. Justice, long delayed, was finally served. Dr. Alana James became a hero in the state, a symbol of integrity and courage. Her office's budget was doubled by the state legislature, and she was given a broader mandate to pursue corruption wherever it was found. The story of the day she was assaulted on the steps of City Hall became a legend, a cautionary tale told to every new police cadet and city employee. Today, if you visit Charleston City Hall, you'll see a new plaque near the entrance. It doesn't bear a name. It simply reads, "Dedicated to the principle that no one is above the law, and that true power belongs not to the uniformed or the elected, but to the people they are sworn to serve." Frank Miller sits in his cell, a forgotten man. He thought he was teaching a lesson about power, about who belonged and who didn't. He was right about one thing. A lesson was taught that day. He learned that you can never judge a person's power by the color of their skin or the clothes they wear. You can never assume someone is weak just because they are standing alone. Because sometimes the person you think is an insect is actually the exterminator. And when justice has been patient for too long, she doesn't just knock on the door. She kicks it down. If you believe that courage can change the world and that bullies should always face the music, share this story. Hit that like button to send a message that accountability matters, and subscribe for more true stories of justice being served. Because somewhere out there, another hero is getting ready to stand up, and their story deserves to be heard.